Welcome back into the Daily Dose. I'm Jeff Hansen. The show's brought to you by Give'emHellBrigham.com and by CougarSportsInsider.com, part of the 24/7 Sports Network. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Frankly, could not be here on this platform without you guys and your support. And candidly, I wouldn't want to be here without you guys and your support. You guys have been phenomenal as we are gearing up for the season. Appreciate each and every one of you who tunes in every day. You guys are the best. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and please continue to fuel the algorithm, like, comment, share, all of those good things. Helps me out a lot. Thank you guys so much. BYU, less than 2 weeks away from the season's kickoff. It's finally here. Training camp will wrap up this week, and BYU will start to transition from conditioning and see what you've got on the roster mode into game prep mode. Scout team players will emerge, the two deep will emerge, and BYU will start to prepare to get ready for Sam Houston State. That probably happens the tail end of this week. And then we're officially in the season grind where BYU gets ready for a new opponent each and every week. It's football season. We're almost there. And it's BYU's debut season of the Big 12. It's a big year. BYU has an important assignment. They've got to show well in the Big 12 to really start to turn the tides in recruiting. They've got to start to recruit better, get more talent. BYU has more talent now than they have in the last 10 years. Recruiting is going okay, but you need to get better continually in the Big 12 conference, and that starts with winning on the field. That's just the way that this works. Because if you don't, recruiting could get really ugly in the Big 12 conference. In fact, 24/7 Sports released an article this weekend where they polled all of their national recruiting analysts. Their national recruiting analysts, and I guess their regional recruiting analysts, not their school-specific recruiting analysts like me, but people who cover a region or who cover the entire country. They polled all of those experts, and they ranked the recruiting potential of the future 16 teams in the Big 12 conference. And BYU, well, they checked in at number 13 out of 16. That's not great. They're just ahead of Iowa State, Kansas, and West Virginia. That's not where you want to be if you're a BYU fan. You don't want to be in the same realm as Iowa State, Kansas, and West Virginia. You want to be up there with Baylor, TCU, Utah, UCF. That's really what your goal is. BYU's got to make some changes in order to get there. They've got to start to win more on the field, and that starts this year. They've got to make a strong impression. And if we look at what these 24/7 Sports analysts had to say, it makes a ton of sense. When you look at BYU, especially from the outside, if you haven't covered BYU, or maybe if you aren't familiar with how they recruit, you look at what they're doing here and you look at traditional recruiting, and BYU just doesn't stack up. BYU is not located in Texas. It's not located in Florida or California. While there's elite talent here in the state of Utah and the overall depth of talent coming out of the state of Utah gets better every year, it's still, we're talking about, 40 to 50 players who are D1 players and probably only 20 players who are P5 players that come out of the state of Utah each and every year. So even if BYU went 100%, which doesn't happen and is unrealistic, but even if they went 100%, they still got to get outside of the state of Utah to fill out the rest of their recruiting class. And if you're on the outside looking in, you're also seeing Utah right there, 40 miles north of Brigham Young University. Therefore, that BYU, at best, you assume, is splitting the in-state talent. Then you factor in all the other schools, the USCs, the Oregons, the Baylors, the other schools throughout the country. Yeah, and it's getting really tough for BYU to finish in the upper echelon of the Big 12 conference. But if you know BYU, you know that they don't just recruit the state of Utah. You know that they have an honor code. And while that limits their ability to go to any house, it also helps their ability to go to specific houses. Even members or even players who are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the honor code and the environment that BYU offers can be appealing, but the football team has to hunt to find those players. This year they have Therian Alexander, Jonathan Cabea. These are two players who are not members of the church. They're from Texas. They're from Georgia, but they're strong Christians. They identify with the values that BYU represents, and they are intrigued by the culture in Provo, Utah. Therefore, they've committed to BYU. These are guys who had Power 5 options, but they still came to BYU. And that's what the Cougars can do. And if you follow BYU recruiting, you know that that is possible. But if you follow BYU recruiting, you know that they have to recruit better among members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And if they do, there's a ton of talent there spread out throughout the country. Brandon Huffman sees that potential. Brandon Huffman, national recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports. He's been with Scout.com. He has covered the recruiting world for years. He is one of the foremost experts of recruiting in the Western United States, and he sees a little bit of a different outlook for BYU. And I want to read through his comments and just share them with you so that we can all read them and be on the same page. So if we look at everything that they wrote about BYU, in a poll full of widely varying opinions, no program split 24/7 Sports analysts more than BYU. The Cougars' standard deviation easily ranked first, with Arizona as a distant second. BYU has to deal with the disadvantage of playing in the same conference and almost the exact same location as arch rival Utah, which has had more success on a national level in recent years. Plus, the university's affiliation with the LDS Church yields an honor code that does not appeal to all recruits. Thus, 4 of the 24/7 Sports analysts voted the Cougars last. But Huffman picked BYU 5th, while fellow West Coast analyst Greg Biggins voted the Cougars 8th. Huffman explained his vote. BYU has always had a national brand and national appeal. While much of the Big 12 recruits regionally, BYU has been able to recruit nationally, and now they've really built the 2024 class for their entry into the Big 12, Huffman said. Now that they'll have the opportunity to show recruits they're in the Big 12, I think it opens up more doors for them. I really like what Huffman says. Huffman's covered guys who have been recruited by BYU for a long, long time. He knows this coaching staff. He knows people who have worked at BYU and have left BYU and now work within the industry, the high school football industry. He's connected to BYU and he's connected to the recruiting scene. And when he looks at BYU, he sees a very, very different outlook than what people on the outside might see. And I tend to think that Huffman is right. Maybe BYU doesn't finish 5th in the Big 12 in recruiting rankings each and every year, but I don't think that Biggins, who's also an expert on BYU recruiting and has covered kids from the West forever as well, but 8th, I think BYU really does fit somewhere in that 5th to 8th if they get their ducks in a row and they're able to start recruiting at a high level. BYU's coaching staff, they can't afford to miss, right? The margin for error is small. Some years, like this year, there's a lot of players who are edge defenders or who are linebackers, defensive ends. BYU can miss on 1 or 2 of those, but they got to convert on 1 or 2 others. The example, of course, Cash Dillon went to Utah. That hurts. That stings. BYU's got to be able to land a guy like Kini Laufonahema, who was just offered by Utah. Or they've got to land Devo Tuataga, who's been offered by most of the West. If they land Tuataga and Fonahema, then yeah, no harm, no foul. Dillon can go to Utah and everybody's thrilled. BYU's margin for error is small, but if they hit on all cylinders and they recruit well within that window, I don't see any reason that BYU can't finish in that 5 to 8 region as they move forward in the Big 12 conference. Now, look, that's not going to happen overnight. That is going to take time, and that time can be extended if BYU stumbles this year. If the Cougars come out and they finish 3-9 or 4-8 and they don't look particularly competitive, it's going to be a slow grind as BYU works up on the recruiting trail. But if they could come out, they get to a bowl game, they finish with 7, maybe 8 wins, that's something that this program can build off of. And looking forward, the 2025 and 2026 recruiting classes in the state of Utah could be all-timers. There is so much talent. In fact, 2026 recruiting class that we just released on 24/7 Sports are our initial top 100 players for the entire country. In the 2026 class, 4 of them are from the state of Utah. Yes, the state of Utah has 4 players inside the top 100 in just a couple of years. BYU's got to be able to convert on that opportunity and land at least 1 or 2 of those players in the future. And that starts now. That starts with winning on the field. That starts in just a couple of weeks against Sam Houston State. BYU recruiting, it's the lifeblood of the program. It's got to get better, and I think it will. I think we're seeing the signs that things are turning. Success on the field is ultimately what will kind of hit that success home and really give BYU the platform to take off and have success right away. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to the Daily Dose. And until next time, give them hell.